In this video, we will explore what the source of wealth truly is, how lasting power is constructed, and why empires throughout history have risen and fallen. Although the story appears on the surface to be about gold and silver, it is in fact shaped around financial systems, institutions, and the concept of trust. Spain discovered the greatest treasures in human history and still went bankrupt. Mountains of silver, rivers of gold, entire continents brought under imperial control. For a brief moment in the 16th century, Spain was not merely powerful, it appeared untouchable. If wealth were measured solely by precious metals, the Spanish crown should have ruled the world indefinitely. But that did not happen. Welcome to this narrative where money, power, and history intersect. And here, nothing is as simple as it first appears. This was not merely a rivalry between two kingdoms. It was an economic experiment conducted on a global scale. Spain and England did not only clash at sea, they competed over a far deeper question. What actually creates lasting wealth? Treasure or systems? Resources or institutions? Extraction or engineering? The answer to that question reshaped the modern financial order. In 1492, when Christopher Columbus sailed west under the Spanish crown, Europe had no idea it was about to trigger the largest transfer of precious metals in human history. Within decades, Spain conquered vast territories across the Americas. In 1521, Hernán Cortés dismantled the Aztec Empire. In 1533, Francisco Pizarro crushed the Inca Empire. The spoils were staggering. Then came Potosí. High in what is now Bolivia, this region contained what may have been the richest silver deposit ever discovered. The mountain known as Cerro Rico produced an estimated 16,000 tons of silver between the mid-1500s and the mid-1600s, along with roughly 180 tons of gold shipped from the Americas. This flood of precious metal transformed Spain into the financial center of Europe. By 1600, Spain controlled a global empire stretching from the Philippines to Peru, from Naples to the Netherlands. Its navy dominated the Atlantic. Its armies, the feared tercios, were regarded as nearly invincible. If you had looked at a map in 1580, you might have concluded that Spain had already won history, but the first crack in the illusion appeared here. Wealth arrived faster than Spain could absorb it. Silver poured into Seville. Prices began to rise, then rose again, and then continued rising. Between 1500 and 1650, prices across Spain and much of Europe increased roughly fourfold. This process is now known as the price revolution. What appeared to be national enrichment was, in reality, early modern inflation. The money supply expanded dramatically as bullion flooded the economy, but domestic production did not keep pace. More money chased the same quantity of goods. Inflation is not a modern invention. It is a mathematical consequence. Spain had more silver than anyone else, yet that silver diluted its own value. At the same time, a more subtle transformation was taking place. Spain became dependent on imports. Instead of investing heavily in domestic industry, it used American treasure to purchase manufactured goods from the Netherlands, Italy, and later England. Textiles, tools, ships. Spain paid others to build what it could have produced itself. Silver flowed in, finished goods flowed out. If this model sounds familiar, it should. Resource-rich nations often mistake cash inflows for strength. When revenue feels effortless, discipline erodes. Why industrialize aggressively when the mines keep producing? But silver is not productivity, it is liquidity, and liquidity without structure evaporates. The Spanish crown, particularly under rulers like Philip II, financed enormous military campaigns across Europe. Wars in the Netherlands, conflicts with France, battles against the Ottoman Empire. The scale of the empire demanded constant expenditure. Armies required pay. Fleets needed maintenance. Fortresses had to be reinforced. As a result, Spain borrowed heavily. German banking families, such as the Fuggers and Genoese financiers, extended credit to the monarchy, using anticipated silver shipments as collateral. On paper, this arrangement seemed rational. The mines were still operating. But empires do not run on paper. When silver fleets were delayed by storms or piracy, cash flow tightened. When military expenses exceeded expectations, which they often did, deficits ballooned. Then came the defaults. Spain declared sovereign bankruptcy in 1557, then again in 1575, again in 1596, and again in 1607. The richest empire on earth repeatedly failed to meet its obligations. This was not merely incompetence, it was structural fragility. Spain's political system concentrated power in the monarchy. Taxation was uneven and inefficient. Regional privileges fragmented revenue collection. The nobility resisted reform. Economic modernization lagged behind military ambition. The empire was vast, but its financial infrastructure was weak. Now look north. In the 16th century, England was not impressive. It lacked Spain's colonial scale. It lacked massive inflows of bullion. It lacked an aura of inevitability. England was smaller, poorer, and politically unstable. Its navy was developing, but not yet dominant. Yet beneath the surface, something was forming. In 1588, the Spanish Armada sailed toward England with the intention of crushing it. The fleet was enormous, more than 130 ships. Spain expected a decisive victory. Instead, storms, logistical failures, and English naval tactics shattered the Armada. England survived, not because it was wealthier, but because it adapted faster. Over the following century, England endured internal upheaval. Civil war erupted in the 1640s. King Charles I was executed in 1649. The monarchy was abolished, then later restored. Such instability could have permanently crippled the country. Instead, it forced a redesign. In 1688, the Glorious Revolution permanently shifted power away from absolute monarchy and toward parliament. This was not merely a constitutional event. It was a financial revolution. Authority over taxation and borrowing moved from an unpredictable sovereign into a more institutional framework. Investors noticed. In 1694, the Bank of England was founded. This was not a ceremonial body. It was designed to manage government debt efficiently and stabilize credit. The government could now issue long-term bonds backed by parliamentary taxation authority. That single change altered the geometry of power. Spain borrowed against silver shipments. England borrowed against institutional credibility and credibility compounds. During the 18th century, England and later Britain accumulated staggering levels of public debt, particularly during wars against France. By the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815, British public debt exceeded 200% of GDP. That figure sounds alarming. But the difference lay in trust. Investors believed in the system. British bonds traded actively. The state honored its commitments. Taxation was predictable. Financial markets were deep and increasingly sophisticated. In this model, debt was not a sign of weakness. It was an instrument. Spain had mountains of metal and fragile credit. Britain had limited metal and powerful credit. Which was more valuable? Credit markets allowed Britain to finance wars consistently. It did not depend on a single shipment arriving safely across the ocean. It depended on confidence, and confidence can mobilize more capital than any mine. By the mid-17th century, British financial institutions had matured into a network capable of funding not only war, but enterprise. Insurance markets expanded. Joint stock companies proliferated. The East India Company became both a commercial and political force. Trade routes multiplied. Manufacturing intensified. Then came steam. The Industrial Revolution did not erupt in Spain. It erupted in Britain. This was not an accident of geography. It was an outcome of incentives. Britain's financial system encouraged reinvestment, experimentation, and capital formation. Meanwhile, Spain's empire was straining. Colonial revolts emerged. Administrative inefficiencies deepened. Economic dependency hardened. The very wealth that had made Spain dominant in the 1500s became a cushion that delayed reform. Unmanaged abundance breeds complacency, and complacency is costly. By the early 19th century, Spain's global dominance had faded. Britain controlled trade routes. London became the financial capital of the world. The pound sterling functioned as a global reserve currency long before the dollar existed. Here is where the story becomes uncomfortable, especially for modern audiences. Britain inherited the trade network Spain had opened. It learned from Dutch banking innovations. It adapted and institutionalized what others had pioneered. History is not a straight Anglo ascent, it is layered. The economic battle between Spain and England was not decided by cannons alone. It was decided by how each empire defined wealth. Spain believed treasure equaled power. England believed trust equaled power. One model was extractive. The other was systemic. That difference still echoes today. The story did not end with Britain's rise and Spain's decline. It evolved. Because what Spain and England were truly competing over was not territory, but a theory of wealth. Spain believed wealth was something you discovered. England believed wealth was something you constructed. That distinction may sound philosophical, but it is mechanical. Look at the modern world. In the 20th century, vast oil reserves were discovered across the Middle East, Russia, Venezuela, and parts of Africa. Entire nations suddenly sat atop rivers of energy, the modern equivalent of Potosí's silver. Revenues surged, budgets expanded, consumption exploded. Yet an uncomfortable pattern emerged. Countries rich in natural resources often struggled with currency instability, inflation, corruption, and sovereign debt crises. Economists call this the resource curse. But it is not a curse. It is a structural temptation. When wealth arrives easily, reform feels unnecessary. Countries without abundant natural resources were forced to build systems. Japan after World War II, South Korea in the 1960s. They constructed export industries, manufacturing bases, educational infrastructure, and financial discipline. Constraints create structure. Abundance often erodes it. Now bring this closer to the present. The United States did not become the dominant financial power of the 20th century solely because of gold reserves. Yes, under the Bretton Woods system, after World War II, the U.S. held the majority of the world's gold, but gold did not sustain the dollar's dominance after 1971, when convertibility was severed. What sustained it was trust. U.S. Treasury markets became the deepest and most liquid sovereign debt markets in history. The Federal Reserve acted as lender of last resort. Legal institutions, imperfect but comparatively stable, supported contracts and capital flows. Investors believed the system would endure. Public debt in the United States now exceeds 100% of GDP. In isolation, that number appears dangerous. Spain defaulted repeatedly at far lower ratios, but ratios do not tell the full story. What matters is whether investors believe the system can service the debt without destroying the currency or undermining growth. As long as treasury markets remain liquid and credible, debt functions as an instrument rather than a weakness. That is the distinction Spain never mastered. Silver runs out. Trust scales. But trust is not automatic. If political instability undermines fiscal discipline, if inflation becomes persistent, if central bank credibility weakens, if debt grows faster than productive capacity, even the strongest financial anchor begins to drift. This is not alarmism, it is structural logic. Spain did not collapse the moment inflation appeared. It decayed slowly. Repeated defaults raised borrowing costs. Dependency deepened. Institutional reform lagged behind geopolitical ambition. From the outside, Spain still looked dominant for decades. Financial erosion rarely announces itself loudly. There is an uncomfortable symmetry here. Every dominant financial system eventually faces the temptation Spain faced, relying on status instead of discipline. Today, the United States benefits from network effects. The dollar is embedded in global trade, energy markets, derivatives, and sovereign reserves. Replacing it would be enormously costly for the world. That creates inertia. But inertia is not immunity. The lesson is not that America will become Spain. The lesson is simpler. Credibility is the true reserve asset. Britain understood this after the Glorious Revolution. Parliamentary control over taxation gave creditors confidence. The Bank of England created structure. Bond markets disciplined government through pricing mechanisms. The United States inherited and expanded that framework. Its capital markets became the center of gravity for global finance. But frameworks require maintenance. When fiscal deficits widen structurally rather than cyclically, when monetary policy stretches to accommodate political pressure, when institutional independence erodes, the English model begins to resemble the Spanish one. Not immediately, but gradually. The distinction between extractive wealth and engineered wealth still matters. Now bring this down from the macro level to the individual. Spain's mistake was not discovering silver, it was assuming silver meant permanence. Individuals make the same mistake during economic bubbles. Asset prices rise. Housing, equities, crypto. Balance sheets expand. Leverage feels manageable because valuations are climbing. Liquidity masks fragility. Conditions change when income is tied to appreciation rather than productivity. Downturns expose the weakness. This is the modern version of a delayed silver fleet. Financial freedom is not about catching the right boom. It is about building systems that survive cycles. Diversified cash flow, disciplined reinvestment, controlled leverage, institutional awareness. The global financial system is not held together by gold bars and vaults. It is held together by belief in enforcement, repayment, and continuity. Spain had vaults full of metal. Britain built vaults full of contracts. The United States today anchors a system of contracts, treasury securities, dollar clearing networks, global payment rails. That is real power. But power built on contracts requires trust, and trust requires restraint. The economic battle between Spain and England was not about nationalism. It was about financial design. Spain centralized power around the crown. Britain distributed power across parliament, creditors, and markets. One model was politically concentrated and economically volatile. The other was politically constrained and financially scalable. That difference altered the trajectory of global power for centuries. The modern world still operates on that template. Countries rich in commodities but weak in institutions struggle with inflation and currency crises. Countries strong in institutions but modest in resources often dominate capital flows. The question is never who has the most treasure. It is who has the most credible system. That is the sting in this story. Spain won the gold, England won the architecture, and architecture outlasts treasure. History does not punish nations for being wealthy. It punishes them for misunderstanding what wealth actually is.